Before you fall asleep tonight, these stories found you for a reason. Some stories wait in the dark for someone who needs them. Maybe tonight, that someone is you. Hello, night seekers. And welcome to Sleepy Shadows, your quiet corner of the night, where whispers replace the noise of the world. Wherever you're listening from, I'm truly glad you're here. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? If these stories help you unwind, subscribe, so you always have a place to return to. Now, take a slow breath in and gently exhale. Close your eyes, and let's drift into the shadows. When I was around 11 or 12 years old, summers for me meant one thing more than anything else: books. I would go to the library at the beginning of summer and check out as many books as they would allow me to carry. I loved the feeling of stacking them up beside my bed, knowing I had weeks of stories waiting for me. While other kids were outside late riding bikes or hanging out, I was usually inside, stretched out on my bed, reading until my eyes burned. Most nights followed the same pattern. I would tell myself I'd stop after one more chapter, then another, and another. Eventually, I would fall asleep with the light still on, and the book open somewhere on my chest or beside me on the bed. My parents knew this about me and didn't really fight it. Reading was harmless, and it kept me happy. One particular summer night stands out more than any other. It had been raining lightly all evening, not a heavy storm, just enough to cool the air and make everything smell damp and fresh. My bedroom window was open, but I had a big box fan fitted into it. Normally, I used that fan all the time, but that night the air was cool enough that I didn't need it. The fan was off, just sitting there in the window. That night, I decided to start reading Dracula by Bram Stoker. I remember feeling a little thrill as I opened it. I knew the general idea of vampires, of course, but I had never read anything like it before. It felt grown up and a little forbidden. The kind of book that made me feel brave just for reading it alone at night. I climbed into bed, turned on my light, and started reading. I hadn't gotten very far when I heard a sound. At first, it was just a rustling noise near my window. It was faint, barely noticeable, and my first thought was that it was just the rain, or maybe the branches of a nearby tree moving in the wind. I kept reading, trying to ignore it. Then I heard it again. This time it was louder, more deliberate. It didn't sound like rain at all. It sounded like something moving. I looked up from the book toward the window. What I saw didn't register right away. There was something brown moving near the top of the box fan, right where the window met the frame. At first, my brain tried to label it as something harmless. Maybe a bird, maybe a large moth, maybe my eyes were just tired. Then it moved again. That's when I realized it was a bat. I froze. For a few seconds, I just stared, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. The bat was crawling, awkwardly, using its small claws to grip the edge of the window. It wasn't flying. It was squeezing itself through the small space near the fan, inch by inch, like it was determined to get inside. My heart started pounding. I didn't scream. I didn't jump out of bed. I just sat there, completely still, watching this bat slowly make its way into my bedroom. The fact that I was reading Dracula at that exact moment didn't help at all. It felt unreal, like my imagination had somehow spilled into real life. After what felt like several minutes, I finally forced myself to move. Very quietly, I slid out of bed and stepped into the hallway. I didn't want to make any sudden noises. I didn't know what bats did when they got scared. I walked to the top of the front stairs and stood there, gripping the railing. In a weak, shaky voice, I called down, "Dad!" There was a pause. Then I heard him respond, asking what was wrong. I told him there was a bat in my room. I could hear the disbelief in his voice immediately. He asked me to repeat myself, probably thinking I was joking or half asleep. I said it again. There is a bat in my room. That got his attention. He came up the stairs and into my room, moving quickly but calmly. He looked at the window, and sure enough, the bat was still there. By that point, it had wedged itself between the two panes of glass. It was stuck, fluttering weakly, making small, sharp noises. My dad grabbed a piece of wood that had been sitting near the window, something long enough to reach the bat without getting too close. He tried to coax it, tapping lightly, hoping it would crawl back out the way it came in or drop down so he could open the window wider. It didn't work. The bat just stayed there, trapped and panicked. What happened next is something I still remember very clearly, even though I wish I didn't. After trying for what felt like a long time to get the bat out safely, my dad made a quick decision. He stabbed the bat with the piece of wood. The sound it made was horrible. It shrieked, high-pitched and sharp, and then went silent. I stood there, frozen, feeling sick to my stomach. My dad immediately removed the bat, cleaned up the area, and tried to make everything normal again as quickly as possible. He told me it was okay, that it was gone, that I could go back to bed. I did, but I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound made me jump. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting another bat to appear. My mind kept replaying the shriek, the way it sounded when it died. Or the book lay on the floor beside my bed, forgotten. The next morning I felt exhausted and strange, like I had dreamed the whole thing. At breakfast, my dad and I told my mom what had happened. As he explained it, he admitted something that surprised me. He said that when I first called him, he thought I was either imagining things or still half asleep. When he came into my room, he had seen the book on the floor and immediately thought it was a coincidence too perfect to be real. I couldn't really blame him. What were the odds that the same night I decided to start reading a vampire novel was the same night a bat would crawl into my bedroom window? Even now, thinking back on it, it feels absurd. Like the universe was playing a strange joke on a kid who loved books a little too much. I don't think there was anything supernatural about it. Bats exist. Windows are open. Things happen. But that didn't stop it from sticking with me. To this day, whenever I think about that night, I remember the mix of fear and disbelief. I remember how real it felt, how much it seemed like fiction bleeding into reality. It taught me something too, even if I didn't realize it at the time. Sometimes life lines things up in ways that feel symbolic, even when they're just coincidence. And sometimes, the scariest moments aren't monsters or ghosts, but the unexpected reality of something very real showing up when you least expect it, right as you're reading about monsters in a book. Our living room sits directly under our master bedroom, so any movement upstairs is impossible to miss. Every footstep, every shift of weight, every sound carries straight down. I learned that quickly after moving in, and especially after having a baby, when I became painfully aware of every noise in the house. That night, I was downstairs in the living room, sitting on the couch, nursing my newborn in the quiet, dim light. The house felt still, heavy with that strange silence that only exists late at night when everyone else is asleep. I was exhausted in a way that's hard to explain unless you've been there. Newborn exhaustion isn't just being tired. It's a deep, foggy state where your body is running on instinct and caffeine, and very little else. My boyfriend was asleep upstairs, and I was trying to keep everything calm so I wouldn't wake anyone, especially the baby. That's when I heard it. At first, it sounded like running. Fast, heavy running, back and forth, directly above my head, in our bedroom. I immediately assumed it was the dogs. We had two at the time. One of them was a fairly large Rottweiler named Tank, and when he moved, you knew it. There was no mistaking his weight. The other dog was smaller, but just as energetic. When they chased each other upstairs, it sounded like a stampede. The noise wasn't subtle. It wasn't a creak or a pop, or the normal sounds houses make at night. It was full-on running. Paws hitting the floor hard. Something sliding. Something bumping. The kind of noise that makes you roll your eyes because you already know exactly what's happening. Those dogs were little assholes when they got into trouble. They only ever ran around like that when one of them had stolen something. Usually panties, sometimes baby items, socks, anything they weren't supposed to have. They would grab it and take off, and the other would chase them like it was the most exciting game in the world. Already irritated and tired, I didn't even look up. I just yelled. I shouted up the stairs, telling them to shut it and come downstairs. No response. The running continued. I yelled again, louder this time, still trying to keep my voice controlled because I didn't want to wake the baby any more than I already might have. I told them again to shut up and get downstairs. Still nothing. The noise went on for several more seconds. Heavy, chaotic movement, right above me. It felt endless in that moment. My nerves already shot, my body tense as I tried to keep my baby calm and latched. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Complete silence. And in that silence, something clicked in my brain. I heard Tank. Not upstairs. Downstairs. Behind the other couch, I heard him stretch. That long, familiar dog stretch where their body shifts, and they let out a little grunt. Then I heard him get up and start walking across the living room floor. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. Tank had been downstairs the entire time. I slowly turned my head and looked over. There he was. Right there. Walking toward me. Very much awake. Very much real. Very much not upstairs. And then it hit me all at once. Our other dog wasn't even home. She was at the groomer. There was no second dog. There was no one who could have been running upstairs. I felt cold all over. Not just goosebumps. Not just chills. It was like all the warmth drained out of my body at once. My chest tightened. My heart started pounding, and for a moment I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at Tank, trying to understand what I had just heard. Because I knew what I heard. I wasn't half asleep. I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake, nursing my baby, fully aware. The sounds were loud, clear, unmistakable. Running, multiple footsteps, movement that could not be explained by one dog stretching behind a couch. I have never been scared like that before in my life. Not startled, not uneasy, terrified. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't even consider it. I stayed exactly where I was, holding my baby close, listening to every tiny sound, my mind racing. I kept replaying it over and over, trying to rationalize it, but nothing made sense. Eventually, the rest of the night passed without anything else happening. But I didn't sleep. Every time I thought about going upstairs, my stomach twisted. I waited until morning, when sunlight made everything feel a little less threatening, before I finally went up there. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was moved. Everything looked normal. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. What made it worse was remembering something else. A few months before that night, something similar had happened, and I hadn't thought much of it at the time. My boyfriend had been out of town, and a friend of mine stayed over so I wouldn't be alone. She slept downstairs on the couch. I slept upstairs in the bedroom like usual. The next morning, she asked me a strange question. She asked why I had been walking around upstairs in the middle of the night. I told her I hadn't. She insisted she heard someone pacing around, moving back and forth above her for a while. At the time, I laughed it off and told her it was probably the dog. That made sense. Dogs walk around at night sometimes. They shift, they move, they get up for water. Except she told me something that made me pause. She said the dog had been sleeping right next to her, snoring, the entire time. We brushed it off. Neither of us wanted to dig into it. It felt easier to laugh and move on than to sit with the discomfort of not knowing. But now, thinking back on it after what I experienced, it made my skin crawl. The same house, the same upstairs, the same kind of movement. And both times it happened when my boyfriend wasn't home. Both times, the dogs weren't in a position to explain it. What makes it even worse is that nothing like that ever happens when my boyfriend is home. Nothing happens when the dogs are together and awake. These are dogs that bark at literally nothing. They bark at their own farts. If there were a real person upstairs, or even something unfamiliar, they would lose their minds. But they didn't. Tank was asleep. Peacefully. Right behind me. To this day, I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was something residual, something tied to the house, or something else entirely. I don't know why it only happens under specific circumstances. I don't know why it mimics familiar sounds, like footsteps or running, like it's copying what should be there. All I know is that I trust my senses. I know the difference between house noises and something that is actively moving. I know what dogs running sounds like. And I know that night was not normal. I don't go upstairs alone at night anymore. I avoid it as much as I can. Even now, years later, the thought of standing in that bedroom in the dark makes my chest feel tight. I always make sure the dogs are with me. I always check that my boyfriend is home. And if I hear anything strange, I don't investigate. I stay right where I am. Whatever it is, it doesn't like witnesses. And I have absolutely no intention of giving it one again. I am not a superstitious person at all. I've never been someone who believes easily in ghosts, demons, or anything supernatural. I'm usually the type who looks for logical explanations first, even when something feels strange. That's part of why what happened to me that night shook me so badly. I've replayed it over and over in my head, trying to explain it away. But no matter how I look at it, I can't make it feel normal. Every part of it is burned into my memory, and I swear that every word of this is exactly how it happened. It started with a nightmare. I don't usually remember my dreams very clearly, but this one felt different from the moment it began. It felt vivid in a way that normal dreams don't. In the dream, I was walking down a street in my city. It wasn't some strange or unfamiliar place. It was a street I recognized, one I've walked down countless times in real life. The buildings looked normal, the street lights were on, and everything felt real enough that I didn't question it. As I was walking, a stranger passed by me and said something. I didn't quite catch what he said. His voice sounded muffled, like he was talking under his breath. I turned around and stepped closer to him, so I could ask him to repeat himself. I remember thinking nothing of it at the time. He looked like a normal person. Nothing about him stood out as threatening. The moment I stepped within arm's reach, everything changed. Without warning, he reached out and stuck me with a needle. I felt a sharp pain, quick and precise, like a sudden sting. Almost immediately, my body went weak. My legs gave out beneath me, and I collapsed. I could feel myself losing consciousness, be sinking into darkness, unable to move or fight back. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the stranger looking down at me with a completely blank expression. When I regained consciousness, I was no longer on the street. I was in what I can only describe as a dungeon in hell. The air was thick and heavy, hot and suffocating. The walls were dark stone, damp and ancient, lit by a dim, flickering red light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I was stretched out on a torture rack, my arms and legs chained tightly so I couldn't move. The metal dug into my wrists and ankles, cold against my skin. Surrounding me were creatures that I can only describe as demons. They weren't cartoonish or exaggerated. They were horrifying in a very real way. Twisted faces, unnatural proportions, were eyes that reflected cruelty and amusement. They circled me slowly, speaking in voices that echoed off the stone walls. They told me there was no escape. They laughed as they said it, a deep, mocking laughter that made my stomach twist. I struggled against the chains, pulling as hard as I could, but it was useless. The more I fought, the more they laughed. I could feel them flaying my skin, peeling it away as if I were nothing more than an object. The pain was unbearable, so intense that it felt like my entire body was on fire. They told me they were preparing my soul for sacrifice to the devil. I screamed. I screamed as loud as I could, begging, crying, thrashing against the chains, even though I knew it was pointless. My screams echoed through the dungeon, but no help came. Only more laughter. Only more voices telling me there was no escape. Then, suddenly, the sound of a doorbell cut through everything. Ding-dong. I woke up instantly, not in the dream, in real life. I shot upright in my bed, gasping for air, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My sheets were soaked with sweat, and my hands were shaking. For a few seconds, I just sat there, trying to get my bearings, trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare. Then the doorbell rang again. Ding-dong? I checked the time. It was exactly 5 o'clock in the morning. It was still completely dark outside. I live alone in an apartment building, and there was absolutely no reason for anyone to be ringing my doorbell at that hour. It was late enough to still feel like night, but early enough that it didn't make sense for anyone to be awake and visiting. My first thought was that I must still be half dreaming. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe the sound was part of the nightmare lingering in my head. But then the doorbell rang again. Ding-dong! That's when fear really set in. I got out of bed and grabbed my flashlight, my hands still shaking. I moved quietly through my apartment, every sound feeling louder than it should have been. The floor creaked beneath my feet as I made my way downstairs to the front door of the building. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. Instead, I stood behind it and looked through the large glass window built into the door. Outside, the porch was completely empty. The street beyond was deserted. There were no cars, no people, no movement at all. It was raining lightly, just enough to make the pavement shine under the dim streetlights. The weather was cold and unpleasant, the kind of weather that makes you want to stay inside, not wander around ringing doorbells. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me not to open that door. I stood there for several minutes, frozen, staring out at the empty porch, trying to make sense of what was happening. If someone had rung the bell as a prank, there was no way they could have disappeared that fast. There was nowhere to hide. No footsteps. No sound of someone running away. I tried to tell myself it had to be a malfunction. Maybe the doorbell was broken. Maybe some electrical issue caused it to ring on its own. But it had only rung twice. Clearly, deliberately, and then stopped. Eventually, I convinced myself there was nothing I could do standing there. So I slowly backed away from the door and went back upstairs to my apartment. The moment I closed my apartment door behind me, the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't just once. Ding-dong, 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 3 times in rapid succession. It sounded urgent, desperate, like someone was pounding on the button trying to force me to come downstairs. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I ran back downstairs, moving as fast as I could, my mind racing with every horrible possibility. Within seconds, I was back at the front door, staring through the glass once again. Nothing. The porch was empty. No movement, no sound, no sign that anyone had been there at all. That was it for me. I didn't try to reason it away anymore. I didn't stand there wondering. I turned around, went back upstairs, and shut off my doorbell ringer completely. I didn't care if it was broken or if someone actually needed help. I couldn't handle hearing it again. Getting back to sleep after that was nearly impossible. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked wrong. When I finally did drift off, it was light, restless sleep, the kind where you never fully relax. The images from the nightmare kept creeping back into my mind, mixing with the sound of the doorbell, until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. To this day, I don't know what happened. I don't know if the dream and the doorbell were connected or if it was a horrible coincidence. I don't know if someone was really there or if my doorbell malfunctioned in the worst possible way at the worst possible time. All I know is that I have never felt fear like that before, the kind that settles deep in your chest and refuses to let go. And ever since that night, falling asleep has never felt quite the same. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Sleepy Shadows for daily calm horror stories made for late nights and sleep. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss a new story when the night gets quiet and the shadows return. Now, let's continue. When I was about 16 years old, I had an experience that still doesn't sit right with me, no matter how many years have passed. I've replayed it in my head countless times, trying to explain it away as imagination, stress, or some strange dream state. But no explanation ever fully fits. What happened felt too structured, too clear, and too real to be dismissed easily. Even now, thinking about it makes my chest feel tight in a way that's hard to describe. It was a normal day, nothing special or emotionally charged. I was in my bedroom, lying on my bed, reading a book. I don't even remember what the book was about, which is strange because I usually remember what I read. I remember the position I was in, though. I was lying on my back, propped up slightly, the book resting against my chest. The room was quiet. No music, no TV, or no voices from the rest of the house. Just silence and the sound of pages turning. After a while, I started to feel hungry. It was that dull, growing hunger that makes you think about getting up and grabbing something to eat. I remember deciding to put the book down and get up. I placed it beside me on the bed. But instead of standing up like I had planned, I lay back down again. I don't know why. There was no clear reason. It was almost automatic, like my body decided before my mind did. That's when things started to feel strange. At first, it was subtle. I felt lighter. Not dizzy, not weak, just lighter, as if some invisible weight had been lifted off me. It reminded me of that feeling you get just before falling asleep, when your body relaxes completely. Except this was different. It wasn't pulling me down into sleep. It felt like the opposite. It felt like I was being lifted. I remember thinking very calmly that it felt like I was floating. And then I actually did. I can say that with certainty, because I wasn't just imagining it from one perspective. I wasn't just feeling it, I was seeing it happen. I began to rise up from the bed, slowly, gently. There was no sudden movement, no jolt, no fear at first. It felt natural, almost peaceful. I rose a few inches above the mattress, then more. And at the same time, I was also standing in the doorway of my bedroom, watching the entire thing happen. That's the part that still unsettles me the most. I wasn't confused, I wasn't panicking. I was aware of 3 points of view at once, and somehow that felt normal in the moment. One part of me was floating above the bed. One part of me was still lying there, completely still, eyes closed. And one part of me was standing in the doorway, watching calmly, like an observer who had no emotional attachment to what was happening. The floating version of me kept rising until I was a little more than a foot above the bed. Then, very slowly, I began to spin. It wasn't fast or violent. It was slow enough that I could feel the movement clearly. As I rotated, my body tilted slightly to the right. It happened so gradually that at first I didn't even realize I was spinning. It was only when I noticed the change in angle that I understood something was happening. From the doorway, I could see it clearly. I could see my body lifting, tilting, rotating in the air above the bed. The room looked the same. The walls, the furniture, the light. Nothing else had changed. Only me. As the spinning continued, I eventually found myself upside down relative to where I had started. That's when I saw my own face. I was looking directly at myself, lying on the bed. My body on the bed looked peaceful. My eyes were closed. I looked like I was asleep, even though I knew I hadn't been. For a moment, everything felt suspended, like time itself had slowed down to allow this impossible situation to exist. Then my eyes opened. The eyes of the me lying on the bed opened and looked straight at the floating me. For a fraction of a second, all three of me were aware of each other. The floating me was aware and alert. The me in the doorway was watching with a cold, detached calm, and the me on the bed opened my eyes and locked onto my own gaze. That moment is burned into my memory. It didn't last long, maybe a fraction of a second, but it felt longer, whereas there was no fear in that instant, no shock, just recognition, like looking into a mirror that wasn't supposed to exist. Then the connection broke. The floating me dropped. There was no sensation of falling through air like a normal fall. It was instant and forceful, like being pulled back into place. The floating version of me slammed back into the body on the bed, and the moment they touched, everything changed. I could no longer see through the eyes of the me in the doorway. That perspective vanished completely. I was suddenly only in my body on the bed. The transition was abrupt and jarring, but not painful. It was more like being snapped back into yourself after being stretched too far. My heart was pounding and my breathing was shallow, but my body felt normal, heavy again, solid. And what surprised me most was the emotional difference between the versions of me. The floating me, in the moment before rejoining, wanted to scream. There was a sudden surge of panic, like realizing too late that something had gone wrong. But the me on the bed didn't feel that fear at all. I was startled, yes, but not terrified. And the me in the doorway had been completely unemotional. Cold. Observant. Like a scientist watching an experiment. That difference still bothers me. I sat up slowly, looking around my room, half expecting something to be different. But everything was exactly the same. The book was still on the bed. The door was still open. The house was still quiet. I checked the time. Only a few minutes had passed. I didn't feel hungry anymore. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time, partly because I didn't know how to explain it, and partly because I was afraid of how it would sound. I didn't want people to think I was making it up, or that I was unstable. So I kept it to myself and tried to forget it. But I never really did. Even now, years later, I remember the clarity of it, the slow movement, the spinning, the moment of eye contact, the way the observer version of me felt so detached, so unlike how I normally am. I don't know what it was. Some people would call it an out-of-body experience. Others might say it was a lucid dream or some kind of dissociation. Maybe it was. I can't say for sure. All I know is that it didn't feel like a dream. Dreams are messy and vague. This was sharp and precise. And sometimes, late at night, when I lie down and close my eyes, I remember how it felt to be weightless. And for just a moment, I'm afraid that if I relax too much, I might start floating again. Here's a story that has stayed with me for years, not because it was loud or violent or obviously frightening, but because of how quiet and personal it was. It's about a kid. He's not my kid, but he's my little cousin. His name is Benjamin. Everyone calls him Ben. And for a long time now, I've been convinced that his so-called imaginary friend isn't imaginary at all. To understand why this bothers me, you need to know about another Ben. Before my cousin was ever born, we had an Uncle Ben in the family. He died by drowning in a local lake a little under a decade before my cousin came into the world, give or take a year. It was one of those deaths that hits a family hard and never really stops hurting. He was young, full of energy, and loved by just about everyone. His death wasn't just tragic, it was shocking, and it left a hole that never really closed. My cousin Ben was named after him. Not just first name either. Same first name, same middle name, same last name. Uncle Ben's older brother, my Uncle C, named his son after him. Uncle Ben was Uncle C's only brother, and they were very close growing up. Naming his son after him was his way of keeping his brother alive, of honoring him. At least that's what we all assumed. Uncle Ben and I were also extremely close. Our ages weren't far apart, and growing up, we did everything together. We were more like brothers than uncle and nephew. We shared secrets, buried stupid little treasures in the yard, told each other corny jokes, pulled harmless pranks, and talked for hours about nothing important at all. When he died, it crushed me. I was old enough to understand what death meant, but not old enough to accept it easily. Fast forward a few years. Little Ben started talking. At first, everything seemed normal. He was a typical toddler, learning words, forming sentences, asking basic questions. But then things started getting strange. And when I say strange, I don't mean quirky kid stuff. I mean specific, detailed things that made absolutely no sense for a child his age to know. It started with how attached he was to me. Whenever I was around, Ben wanted to be with me, and only me. He would cling to my leg, sit next to me, follow me around the house. At first, I thought it was sweet. Kids latch on to people sometimes. But then I realized something else. He didn't talk to me like a normal toddler talks to an older cousin. He didn't ask about toys or cartoons or games. He asked me about things from my childhood. Not just my childhood. Things from Uncle Ben's life. He would ask me questions about places we used to go, things we used to do, in a way that felt less like pretending and more like remembering. He asked me if I still remembered where we buried the treasure. That stopped me cold. I knew exactly what he was talking about. Years ago, Uncle Ben and I had buried a small bag in the backyard behind my great-grandmother's house. It was nothing special, just plastic gold coins, a rusty old switchblade that didn't even work anymore, and a Zippo lighter with no gas. To us, it was priceless. We'd sworn never to tell anyone where it was. No one else knew. When I told little Ben that I remembered the treasure but didn't remember where we buried it, he looked disappointed. Then he grabbed my hand, without hesitation, and led me outside to the little sand pit behind my great-grandmother's house. He pointed to a spot and told me to start digging. About 3 feet down, we found it. The exact same bag. The exact same contents. I didn't laugh. I didn't smile. I just sat there, staring at the hole, feeling my stomach twist. Ben was excited, like this was exactly what he expected to find. Like this wasn't surprising to him at all. After that, it didn't stop. He told me the same stupid jokes Uncle Ben used to tell me. Not kid jokes. corny, dumb jokes that made sense only because Uncle Ben had told them 100 times before. He showed me the same magic tricks. Cheap sleight-of-hand stuff Uncle Ben loved doing just to annoy people. He talked about our adventures, using the same words Uncle Ben used to use. But the real unsettling stuff didn't just happen between Ben and me. It happened between Ben and his father. One day, a bunch of us were over at the house playing cards. There were around 10 people in the living room. It was around lunchtime, and Uncle C was in the kitchen making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Ben walked in and asked him if he still liked peanut butter. That alone wouldn't have been weird. But then Ben said something that made the entire room go silent. He said, "You loved peanut butter when we were brothers. I still love it. Do you remember when we tried mayonnaise and peanut butter?" No one said a word. You could have heard a pin drop. Everyone stared at Uncle C, who was staring down at his son like he'd just been slapped. His face went pale. His hands shook. He swallowed hard, and after a moment, they forced out a shaky, "Yeah, I remember, buddy." That combination was something only Uncle Ben and Uncle C had ever talked about. They tried it once as kids, hated it, and joked about it for years. No one thought it was important enough to tell a toddler. No one even remembered it except them. Another time, Ben kept bugging Uncle C about giving him his Rubik's Cube back. That cube had belonged to Uncle Ben. After his death, it ended up in a box along with some of his other belongings. My grandmother gave that box to me years ago, telling me Uncle Ben would have wanted me to have it. It had been sitting in my attic ever since, untouched, collecting dust. Ben didn't just know about the cube. He knew exactly which box it was in. He knew where the box was sitting in my attic. That information was never shared with anyone, though not even Uncle C knew where that box was. The most recent and by far the strangest event happened last Christmas. Ben showed up carrying his little backpack and proudly announced that he had a surprise for everyone from Uncle Ben. Most people smiled awkwardly, assuming it was something harmless, maybe a drawing or toy. Then he started pulling out photographs. Old photographs. Pictures from the late 1990s. Pictures of Uncle Ben in high school with his friends. Pictures of him doing stupid teenage stuff. Ben knew everyone in the photos by name. He explained where and when they were taken like he had been there. Then he pulled out photos from Uncle Ben's funeral. That's where things crossed a line. No one in my family took pictures at the funeral. It was considered disrespectful. It was a firm rule. Those photos should not exist. No one has been able to explain where they came from. Ben won't say. And no one else has any idea how he could have gotten them. Personally, I try to take the whole thing with a grain of salt. I don't want to jump straight to supernatural explanations. Part of me believes someone in the family is feeding him information to mess with people. There are a few relatives who would absolutely do something like that just to stir shit up. But I have no proof. And some of the details are too precise, too buried in memory, for that explanation to feel complete. So the whole thing just sits there in my mind, unresolved. I don't know what Ben's imaginary friend really is. I don't know how much is coincidence, how much is influence, and how much is something else entirely. All I know is that it's eerie, deeply unsettling, and unlike anything I've ever experienced. That file is still open in my head. It hasn't been sorted. It hasn't been labeled. It's just sitting there, collecting dust, waiting for an explanation that may never come. When I was in high school, a little over 10 years ago now, I volunteered one evening with a friend at a local church. They needed help watching kids during an evening service, and there was also some kind of dinner event afterward. I don't remember the exact schedule, only that it was late for a bunch of little kids, and late enough that the building felt different than it did during the day. I wasn't particularly religious, but volunteering there felt safe. It was a familiar place. I'd been in that church many times before, for services, community events, and holiday gatherings. Nothing about it ever struck me as creepy. It was just a normal church building in a quiet part of town. The daycare area was in a hallway off to the side of the main sanctuary. It consisted of 2 rooms connected by a single door. One room was the snack room, which had a small kitchenette with a sink, cabinets, a counter, and a little table where the kids sat to eat. The other room was the playroom, which was bigger and filled with toys, blocks, mats, and a few tiny tables and chairs. That night, there were only a handful of kids. They were all young, maybe between 3 and 5 years old. After snack time, most of the kids were brought into the playroom by the other volunteer, who stayed in there to supervise them. I stayed behind in the snack room to clean up crumbs, cups, and plates. One little girl asked if she could stay with me. She was small, probably 3 or 4, with that serious, observant look some kids have. She wasn't crying or upset, just quietly asked if she could stay. I didn't see any harm in it. The snack room was clean and safe, and she seemed calmer than the others. I gave her an extra cracker to keep her busy and told her she could sit at the table while I finished cleaning. Everything felt completely normal at first. I wiped down the tables, threw away trash, and stacked some things by the sink. The room was softly lit, and the sounds of the other kids playing could be heard faintly through the door. The little girl sat there eating her cracker, swinging her legs slightly, talking quietly to herself. I didn't think anything of it. Kids talk to themselves all the time. They make up stories, pretend, sing, babble. It's normal. I barely even noticed at first. I was half listening, half focused on cleaning, just assuming she was playing in her own head. Then, without warning, she started crying. Not just whimpering or sniffing, but full-on sobbing. Huge tears rolled down her face. She gasped for breath, and cracker crumbs spilled out of her mouth as she cried. It was sudden and intense, like a switch had been flipped. My first thought was that she had hurt herself. I rushed over to her, set down what I was holding, and picked her up. I hugged her close and checked her mouth, thinking maybe she bit her tongue or choked on the cracker. I gently looked inside her mouth, but there was nothing wrong. No blood, no redness, no sign of injury. She clung to me, still crying hard. I tried to calm her down, rocking her slightly, telling her it was okay. When her crying slowed just enough for her to speak, I asked her what was wrong. Between sobs, she said, "That boy won't stop picking on me." I froze for a second. I looked around the room automatically. It was just us. The snack room was empty. The door to the playroom was closed, and I could hear the other kids in there with the other volunteer. There was no one else in the snack room. No older kids, no boys, no adults. I assumed she meant one of the kids from the playroom. I said gently, "What boy, honey? There's no one else in here." She pulled back slightly from my shoulder and pointed. She pointed to the empty corner of the snack room, near the cabinets. Her face twisted in fear, and she cried even harder as she said, "That dead boy over there!" Every hair on my body stood up. I followed where she was pointing. The corner was completely empty. Just a wall, some cabinets, and a trash can. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. I felt my stomach drop. Kids say strange things sometimes. I knew that. They have imaginations. They repeat things they hear. But there was something about the way she said it. She wasn't playing. She wasn't joking. She was genuinely terrified. I didn't ask her any follow-up questions. I didn't want to know what she meant. I didn't want to risk hearing more. I picked her up again immediately and walked straight into the playroom. I handed her to the other volunteer and told them she was really upset and wanted to stay in there. I didn't explain what she said. I didn't trust my voice to stay steady enough to explain it calmly. I went back into the snack room just long enough to grab my things. The room felt different now. It was quieter, heavier. The same space I had been standing in moments earlier now felt uncomfortable, like I didn't belong there anymore. I avoided looking at the corner she had pointed to. I kept my eyes down and my movements quick. I left the daycare area as soon as I could. I didn't hang around. I didn't volunteer again after that. I didn't tell many people what happened either because I knew how it would sound. People would laugh it off or say kids imagine things all the time. And logically, I know that's true. But logic didn't help in that moment. What stuck with me wasn't just what she said. It was how normal everything had been right before. The calm, the quiet talking, and then the sudden, overwhelming fear that came out of nowhere. She wasn't reacting to something I could see or hear, but she was reacting to something very real to her. I thought about it later, trying to rationalize it. Maybe she had been teased earlier in the playroom and was confused. Maybe she had heard a story or seen something on TV. But maybe "dead boy" was just a phrase she picked up without understanding it. All of those explanations make sense, but none of them fully explain why she pointed to that specific corner, or why she was so shaken, or why the words hit me the way they did, like a punch to the chest. I've been around kids a lot in my life. I've babysat, volunteered, helped with younger family members. I've heard kids say weird, creepy, random things before. This was different. This didn't feel playful or imaginative. It felt like she was describing something she was experiencing, not inventing. I never went back into that snack room alone again. Even now, years later, I remember it clearly. The lighting. The sound of crumbs hitting the floor. The way her finger pointed steady and sure at empty space. And the way my body reacted before my mind could catch up. I don't claim to know what she saw. I don't claim it was a ghost or something supernatural. All I know is that I trusted my instincts that night. And my instincts told me very clearly that whatever made that little girl cry was not something I wanted to stick around and investigate. I don't play with ghosts. Real or imagined, some doors are better left closed. I used to live very close to a graveyard. It wasn't right next door, but close enough that I could walk there in just a few minutes. It sat slightly uphill from the neighborhood, surrounded by old trees and a rusted iron fence that didn't really keep anyone out anymore. For most people, it was probably a place they avoided. For me, it became a place I went when I wanted to be alone. I've always liked quiet places. I've never been great with crowds or constant noise, and the graveyard offered a kind of stillness that was hard to find anywhere else. During the day, it was peaceful. At night, it was calm in a different way. Not calm like relaxing, but calm like the world was holding its breath. I found that comforting. Because of that, I went there often. Sometimes during the day, sometimes late at night. I would walk between the rows of headstones, sit on a low stone wall near the back, or lean against one of the larger monuments and just think. I never felt scared there. If anything, I felt grounded, like everything loud and messy about life faded away inside those gates. I was also, at the time, more than a little interested in the paranormal. I read about it constantly. Ghost stories, spirit encounters, theories about why some places might be haunted and others weren't. I wasn't someone who blindly believed everything, but I was open to the idea that there were things we didn't understand. The graveyard felt like the kind of place where, if something existed beyond what we could see, it might be easier to sense it there. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I started wondering if there was a spirit there that wanted to talk. I mentioned the idea to a few friends who were also into paranormal stuff. They reacted immediately, and not in a good way. Every single one of them told me it was a bad idea. They warned me not to mess with things I didn't understand. They said graveyards weren't places to experiment or provoke anything. They told me very clearly not to do it. I listened. And then I ignored them. Looking back, I should have taken their warnings more seriously. At the time, I thought they were being dramatic. I had been going there for a long time without anything happening. It felt safe, familiar. I convinced myself that if anything were going to happen, it would have happened already. So one night, I decided to go. I left my house around 2:45 in the morning. The streets were empty, the air was cool, and everything felt quiet in that deep, or late-night way, where even your own footsteps sound too loud. When I reached the graveyard, I slipped through the open section of the fence and walked inside. I didn't rush. I wandered around for a bit, walking the paths I already knew by heart. I stopped at my favorite spot and sat there, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. The moon gave just enough light to see the outlines of headstones and trees. There was no wind, no animals, no distant traffic, just silence. When the hour finally changed, I stood up and walked toward the center of the graveyard. I took a deep breath and started asking questions out loud. At first, they were simple, respectful, the kind of things you hear people say in every ghost hunting show or story. I asked if anyone was there who wanted to speak. I asked why they were still there. And I asked if someone could give me a sign if they were listening. I waited between questions, listening carefully. Nothing happened. No sounds, no movement, no feeling of being watched. The graveyard stayed exactly the same. After about 10 minutes, I started to feel foolish. I told myself that my friends had been right, that I was standing alone in the dark, talking to myself. That's when I made the worst decision of the night. Instead of leaving, I changed my approach. I started trying to provoke whatever might be there. I don't even remember exactly what I said, only the tone. I insulted them, called them weak, cowardly, told them they were too scared to show themselves. I said things I wouldn't repeat now, things meant to anger, not invite. Almost as soon as I stopped talking, I heard it. Laughter. It came from about 10 feet ahead of me and slightly to the left. Close enough that I could tell exactly where it was coming from. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't distant. It was right there. And it wasn't normal laughter. It wasn't the sound of someone amused or entertained. It was deep, harsh, and filled with something twisted. The kind of laughter that feels violent even without seeing the person making it. The kind of laughter that makes your blood run cold because it carries intent. The only way I can describe it is this. It sounded like the kind of laugh you'd expect from something that wanted to hurt you and was enjoying the idea. My body reacted before my mind did. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't try to rationalize it. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there, and I listened. I ran through the graveyard, out through the fence, and down the street toward my house as fast as I could. I didn't slow down until my house was in sight. At that point, I told myself I was safe. I had left the graveyard. I was back in a familiar place. Whatever it was couldn't follow me. That's when I heard it again. The laughter came from just over my shoulder. Close. Too close. I didn't think anymore. I just ran harder. I didn't stop until I was inside my house, the door locked behind me. I stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, listening. The laughter didn't follow me inside. Eventually, I went to bed. I slept, but it wasn't good sleep. It was shallow and restless, filled with half-dreams and the constant feeling that something was nearby. When morning came, I felt drained, like I hadn't rested at all. The next day, I saw my friends. Before I even said anything, one of them looked at me and said, "You pissed something off, didn't you?" I asked how they knew. They said it was obvious. I looked wrong, tired, uneasy, like something had rattled me deeply. I told them what happened, and none of them laughed. None of them questioned it. They just shook their heads and told me that was exactly why they had warned me. After that night, things didn't fully stop. A few nights later, I was walking my dog near an empty hill not far from where I lived. It was quiet, no one else around. As we passed the hill, I heard giggling. Soft at first, then louder. It came from the hill, but there was nothing there. No people, no houses, just grass and shadows. Sometimes, even now, I get the feeling that whatever I angered didn't stay in the graveyard. I've moved since then. I've even moved out of the state where this all happened. But every once in a while, usually late at night, I'll hear laughter that sounds just a little too familiar. Too deep. Too wrong. And I'll get the same feeling I had that night in the graveyard. Like something followed me home. Like it's still there, somewhere just out of sight, waiting for me to make the mistake of listening again. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just fade away, they stayed with you. Each one was shared to feel real, quiet, and close. Moments that could happen to anyone. Moments where something felt wrong, or nearly did. If you'd like to keep listening to stories that linger long after they're told, consider subscribing to Sleepy Shadows. There are more waiting in the dark, and not all of them disappear by morning. Good night.